We now know Jimmy Savile was a predatory paedophile for more than 40 years.
Jimmy Savile said, sit on my knee and give your Uncle Jimmy a cuddle.
Many of his victims say they were attacked when they were at their most vulnerable, recovering in hospital.
We're talking about people who went in as patients and some of them came out abused victims.
Or incarcerated in a secure mental health unit.
It just beggars belief that a non-member of staff could have access to a set of keys.
We gave him every instrument that he needed in Broadmoor to prey on some extremely damaged individuals.
Now the police are investigating how Savile infiltrated these institutions. This woman might have the answer. She was by his side almost every day for 28 years.
I'd start with manipulative, then controlling, and very, very clever.
She wrote his letters, kept his diary, maintained his address book. And now she tells her story and opens her archives for the Jimmy Savile investigation. Within 11 months of his death, Jimmy Savile's status as a national treasure was demolished. Once idolised as a radio DJ, television presenter,
welcome indeed to Jimmo Fix It,
and charity fundraiser extraordinaire.
Keep all our fingers crossed and we hope that the British public respond as they have done.
He's now reviled as a paedophile, believed to have abused hundreds of children and vulnerable people. It is a mighty fall for a man who was once one of the biggest names in show business. His secret life as a sexual predator was revealed by this programme 7 weeks ago.
A documentary on ITV1 this week will feature 5 women who claim they were abused by the TV presenter as teenagers in the 1970s.
For the first time, his victims' voices were heard.
I was just dragged out of the caravan and told, how can I make those terrible accusations?
I can still get very angry over it, but nobody believed me then. So I don't expect people to believe me now.
And his old colleagues admitted they missed the warnings.
Very painful. Very distressing. Because in a funny way, we all colluded with this, didn't we? We made him into the Jimmy Savile, who was untouchable.
The programme proved to be just the start.
What began with 5 women claiming in an ITV documentary to have been sexually assaulted by Sir Jimmy Savile has now snowballed.
As more victims came forward.
Silence has been shattered.
Caroline Moore was just 13.
Another woman who says she was abused 40
Karen
years
Moore
ago.
told ITV 40 potential victims. Some from the Broadmoor Hospital. There seems to be no end to the complaints.
Dozens of people contacted me with information about Savile. Many of them reported allegations of abuse to the police, like Denise. She lived in Leeds in the 1960s. She says Savile was a family friend and he abused her when she was just 10 years old.
Jimmy Savile said, come over here and sit on my knee and give your Uncle Jimmy a cuddle. And reluctantly, he went over to him and he pulled me towards him, sat me down on his lap. He was saying, oh, it's all right, it's your Uncle Jimmy, he won't hurt you. Then he put his hand up my skirt and inside my knickers. He was rubbing my leg at first, just rubbing my leg, and then he started touching me. I was just frozen. I just couldn't do anything. I couldn't tell him to stop.
She says Savile abused her again a few weeks later. She never told anyone because she didn't understand what had happened until she was much older. A common response of many child abuse victims. When she heard that Savile had been unmasked as a paedophile, she was overwhelmed.
My first thought was, these poor women, no one's going to believe them. And I have to say something to somebody. And that I just felt like I'd kept quiet for too long, and maybe guilty. I felt really guilty that what happened to me. They were talking about these women in the 70s, and what happened to me was in the early 60s, and I felt like if only I'd said something or made somebody listen to me, that you couldn't, like I could have stopped it.
Victims of child abuse can suffer deep psychological scars. Savile was a predator who targeted the young and the vulnerable. It is now the job of the police to determine how many other people suffered at his hands. The Metropolitan Police is coordinating a vast inquiry, looking into more than 450 allegations of abuse.
It appears that Savile's abusive behaviour spans 4 decades.
The scandal has prompted inquiries by government departments, hospitals and charities, but not least the BBC, who employed Savile for 30 years.
Jimmy Savile's victims have faced years of pain. We owe it to them and to our audiences to understand how this could have happened, and to make sure that everything we do ensures that nothing like this could ever happen again.
And ITV has launched an independent investigation into an allegation that he appeared to squeeze a schoolgirl's bottom at Yorkshire Television in the late 1980s. But amidst the storm within the media, another story is emerging. Because it's not only the BBC questioning why Savile went undetected and unhindered for so long. He infiltrated and even dominated, according to some witnesses, a number of institutions housing vulnerable people, like Stoke Mandeville Hospital in Buckinghamshire, where he had 2 offices and a bedroom, and Broadmoor High Security Hospital, where he was on a government-appointed task force.
From his office in an official house opposite Broadmoor's main gate, Jimmy Savile now wields considerable clout.
Former patients at both Stoke Mandeville and Broadmoor claim to have been abused by Savile. So how did a man with no qualifications work his way into positions of power at 2 venerable medical institutions? And why was his abuse never exposed nor stopped? It seems the answer is a combination of power, fame, and cunning. Jimmy Savile was a secretive man. He never married, he had few close friends, but one woman got closer to him than most. Janet Cope was his personal assistant for decades, fixing his meetings, writing his letters. He even gave her away at her wedding.
I knew how he operated, so I was very wary of him, and I felt that there was an undercurrent, there was a bad side to him, which not many people saw. I did, because I was very close to him.
Savile recruited Janet from the typing pool at Stoke Mandeville Hospital. She was a fixture in his life for the next 28 years as his profile soared. The exposure of her old friend as a sexual predator was a shock. Despite decades by his side, she says she never saw Savile do anything improper with anyone, nor did she hear any rumours.
The 30 years I was with him, I saw absolutely nothing. And had I done so, he would have known that I would have challenged him, because that's my nature. So I can only answer for the years that I was with him. I can't answer for the years that I wasn't, and before he became really, really famous.
But Janet accepts Savile always had a dark side. He was controlling, manipulative, and vindictive. After the recent revelations, Janet wanted her say. And for the first time, she has also handed over her archives to exposure. They document Savile working his way to the top, the very top.
A picture here which is actually him.
With the Queen.
With the Queen.
That's right. Yeah, I don't know where that picture was taken, to be quite honest.
And quite interesting. I mean, we've got a big smile there, and we've got kind of like a distasteful... Yeah, what are you talking to me about?
That's right. He was quite sane when he was talking to somebody like that. He would be quite normal and come out with normal things. It was when he was trying to impress somebody or be top dog that he came out with what I thought was a bit things that I didn't really approve of, but I never took too much notice of.
Janet has letters from royalty.
And here's a personal letter from Prince Charles' signature.
Even an address book.
You refer to it as a Bible.
Yes, I did, always, and Jim did too.
We've got Edwina Curry's office, we've got Alistair Campbell, we've got Prince Charles's office, and then we've got the disgraced Jonathan King. In here is just about every single person you could possibly think of who's who during the period of time that Jimmy Savile was alive.
Correct.
The Contacts book is a veritable A to Z of British society. And lurking within the files is a moment which Savile regarded as one of his greatest.
Now, there's not many people that would have a personal chat, and he's clearly talking to him here,
oh yeah,
with the Pope.
Jimmy was very proud of that. He was a Catholic, and not many people can say that they've had a sort of chat with the Pope. It was, again, something different for Jim, something top of the tree. And he got a papal knighthood, of course.
Yes. A private moment with the Pope, proof of Savile's uncanny ability to ingratiate himself with the great and the good. And the photograph also highlights another key Savile contact. The man introducing Savile to Pope John Paul II is Cardinal Basil Hume, then the Archbishop of Westminster. He would later recommend Savile for membership of one of London's most exclusive private clubs, the Athenaeum, a location for some crucial Savile meetings. And within Janet's records are more examples of Savile's social climbing.
This is a letter from the Scottish Information Office, which is addressed to Admiral Savile.
Dear Janet, as you requested, I have pleasure in enclosing for your collection a couple of pictures of Admiral Savile, OBE, taken. Jimmy made a great success of the day, giving it fun and warmth, but also best wishes from your haggis friend.
Do you remember that?
He used to say that he was an admiral of the fleet now. He wasn't a proper admiral.
There is no suggestion that any of these people had an inkling of Savile's dark side. But Janet's archives are notes on a scandal, an insight into Savile's web of contacts and his journey to the heart of the establishment, a position he would abuse by harming a string of children. Exposure is investigating how Jimmy Savile gained access to two institutions where he used his power and influence to abuse children and vulnerable people. Few establishments were closer to Savile than Stoke Mandeville Hospital in Buckinghamshire. At the height of his work at the hospital, he had two offices and a bedroom, known as the Kennel, on the premises. According to his personal assistant, who was by his side at Stoke Mandeville for almost 30 years, he had real authority.
He controlled everything. He controlled me and everybody, but everybody was, I'm going to use the word, frightened of him.
Savile had a long history of championing hospitals. As a younger man, he volunteered as a porter at Leeds General Infirmary. But as his career took off, he became more closely associated with Stoke Mandeville.
5 minutes in a hospital is a gimmick. If you've got the newspapers there, if you've got the television there, 5 minutes is a gimmick. 5 years, it's not a gimmick.
In 1980, he launched a campaign to raise £10 million to rebuild the Spinal Injury Centre. It was a very ambitious target, but Savile was a brilliant fundraiser, generating millions during his life for umpteen good causes.
He always argued that he was brought up in a sort of charitable environment, but there was also an element that it was good for business as well. He'd been on the front of many newspapers because the campaign to rebuild the Spinal Injury Centre had become a cause célèbre, it had become a national campaign, and it was one of the first of its type. And he was the guy who was spearheading that.
Amazing. Now, what are we doing now, lads?
But at Stoke Mandeville, Janet says this talent also gave him power.
There is no doubt about that. He knew that Stoke Mandeville needed quite a bit of cash to do the work that it was doing, which is quite unique, really, for the paralysed. So his fundraising was very, very important.
Savile's strategy for fundraising was simple. Bring in the big names, especially royalty.
The Duke of Edinburgh.
Within Janet's files is a letter from an aide to the Duke of Edinburgh.
And to pass on his congratulations to you for the splendid results of all the efforts of yourself and your team.
Prince Charles was a visitor. They developed a close relationship. According to Janet, Savile advised him on charity. In 1981, he wrote to Savile lavishing praise.
I was enormously touched by your very kind letter, and both of us send you our warmest thanks. Many congratulations to you for all you are doing at Stoke Mandeville. Yours most sincerely, Charles.
Savile was equally happy charming politicians as royalty. He was in regular contact with the then Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. She wrote to him, saluting his fundraising at the hospital.
My dear Jimmy, I'm delighted to hear that the Prince of Wales has agreed to open the new National Spinal Injury Centre in early August. I shall, of course, bear in mind your invitation to go over to Stoke Mandeville. Every good wish. Yours sincerely, Margaret.
The cream of the British establishment, royalty and politicians, Jimmy Savile was cozying up to them all. And sure enough, when the centre opened...
How on earth do you raise £10 million in 3 years?
I would respectfully ask you if you could declare our building open.
It opened in true Savile style, with Prince Charles and Princess Diana. Savile continued to draw the big names after the centre was opened. In 1991, the wives of several international leaders, including Barbara Bush, visited. With so many celebrities coming through the doors, the profile of the hospital soared and the coffers swelled. Through Savile, Stoke Mandeville had achieved national acclaim. That gave him huge clout, and Savile is now accused of exploiting that power to abuse several patients.
Thank you very much. Okay.
In our first investigation, we interviewed a woman who claims she was abused by him at Stoke Mandeville Hospital at the age of 14. Insisting on anonymity and represented and voiced by an actress, she said Savile attacked her in 1973 after she visited the hospital to sing in a choir.
After the concert, I ran up to him. Before I knew what had happened, he'd stuck his tongue into my mouth. It didn't seem to bother him that other people could have seen what he was doing. I was just so shocked. I pulled away and dashed onto the coach. I couldn't believe what had happened.
Now exposure has learnt more women are coming forward with similar accounts. We understand the police are currently investigating 16 allegations of sexual abuse by Savile at Stoke Mandeville. Liz Dux is a solicitor representing 9 alleged victims. She says the accusations range from indecent assault to rape. One of her clients claims to have been just 8 years old when Savile attacked her.
Well, some of them are totally shattered. We're talking about people who went in as patients and some of them came out abused victims. They were in a place that they trusted, that they were there to be looked after, and that trust was totally breached. And some of them have had their lives destroyed. They're not able to have relationships. They're really not able to function.
Crucially, Duck says some of her clients told staff at the hospital about the attacks.
Several of the victims did report matters to members of staff. People were shocked and told, and the evidence we have is that they told members of staff very promptly afterwards, after the abuse had taken place.
So at least 2 of the 9 victims at Stoke Mandeville told staff members that they had been indecently assaulted by Jimmy Savile?
Yes, they did.
And what did the staff do?
No action was taken.
According to Dux, the picture is clear. Incidents of sexual abuse by Savile were reported to staff but met with no action. This account appears to be at odds with a view of senior hospital management. We have acquired an email sent by the Chief Executive of the Buckinghamshire Healthcare Trust to all of the staff a week after our first programme. It says,
"We're unaware of any record or reports of inappropriate behaviour of this nature during Jimmy's work with the Trust."
If, as Duck states, patients were reporting incidents to staff, why is the Trust unaware of any records or reports, as the email states? This programme has now learned that on the 1st of October 2009, Surrey Police interviewed Savile about a historical allegation of sexual assault at the hospital. That interview took place in Savile's office at Stoke Mandeville. The police say they never told the Trust or the local police force, as there was no requirement to. Savile's former PA believes he was too valuable and too powerful to be confronted. Although she never saw him do anything inappropriate, she believes his influence was so great, no one would have challenged him anyway, even if they'd been aware.
The fundraising he did at Stoke Mandeville, was that so important that perhaps people would turn blind eye to other things?
Yes, definitely. The fundraising was everything. And we just went leaps and bounds. We had £3 million to start building the building within a year. It was amazing.
Do you think they were in a position and felt comfortable to challenge Jimmy Savile?
No, I don't think they would have even thought about challenging him. Definitely not. He was too valuable to them.
Buckinghamshire Healthcare Trust say they are proactively helping the police with their inquiries and examining their own records to investigate their dealings with Savile and the access he had. Although since our first programme, they have yet to acknowledge any abuse took place. They say they will investigate all reported allegations of abuse and misconduct. Janet was to learn herself the extent of Savile's power. After 28 years of dedicated service and no longer a hospital employee, he sacked her in front of several members of Stoke Mandeville staff, just like that.
He was in his office and there was the chief radiographer, there was the chief works officer, there was a senior secretary, and he was puffing away at a cigar and he said, right then, she's out, I'm getting a management team in. I was speechless.
And nobody stood up for you?
No, not one of them stood up for me.
Why?
Because Jimmy was untouchable.
Buckinghamshire Healthcare Trust say they take the protection of their patients very seriously and have safeguards in place, particularly for children. They are now reviewing these measures with the authorities. They are also helping the Department of Health with their investigation.
Oh, this way, please.
Savile appears to have been a dominant force at Stoke Mandeville Hospital. He exploited his fame and power to abuse people. The willingness of the management and staff to challenge him has been questioned by some, but while his presence at Stoke Mandeville was understandable due to his fundraising, his role at another medical institution is harder to fathom.
Tomorrow, we've got patients. Wow!
Jimmy Savile was a prolific sexual predator who exploited his profile to gain access to institutions accommodating vulnerable people. He was a familiar face not only to patients at Stoke Mandeville Hospital, but also to those incarcerated in Broadmoor High Security Hospital, where he was keen to boast about his authority.
If anybody was so basically unhappy here that they didn't like it, then they should hand their notice in and leave.
Savile started visiting the facility in the late 1960s. According to an interview in this BBC programme, he was inspired by a letter from a patient.
Some years ago, in my copious fan mail, I got a notice telling me that I was an honorary member of Nutters Incorporated, run by some of the patients at the world-famous Broadmoor Hospital.
Broadmoor holds some of the country's most dangerous mental health patients, including several notorious criminals, like the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe. The high walls, cameras and razor wire make it very clear security is tight. It seems no place for a television entertainer, but Savile was given an official role by the hospital in the early 1970s.
The hospital asked me officially whether I would join the staff, and I am now Honorary Assistant Entertainment Officer.
But Savile was no ordinary member of staff. He had an office and a garage just outside the secure perimeter, and even a set of keys, seen here on his strap.
How much access did he have in there? Could he just move freely?
Total. And was very proud of the fact that he spoke to all these very high-profile, poorly criminals, really.
And when you turned up with Jimmy to Broadmoor, were you properly searched? Was everything taken off you?
No, just walked in.
In this edition of Clunk Click, Savile even suggested there were Broadmoor people in the audience.
Come down here, then. We've got them here from Broadmoor, we've got them from all over here. So, right, all we can say now, come here, Mrs. Scott's young lady, Mrs. Stoke Mandeville young lady.
The BBC said it does not hold audience records for the programme, but the broader issue of who was attending and why will be examined as part of Dame Janet Smith's review. Savile appeared to form a bond with patients. Within his former PA's archives is a letter, seemingly from a patient, thanking Savile for taking her on a supervised day trip.
Dear Janet, I reached home safely. I don't know how to say thank you for taking us round, but I say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Please thank Jimmy also. If you wish to write me a letter, you know my address. Come with Jim to see us sometime. I can't come and see you, but I would like to see you again.
The document is a fascinating insight into Savile's role at the facility, a television presenter entertaining mental health patients. But just like at Stoke Mandeville, it appears Savile had darker motives. We have found a former patient who was in Broadmoor in the 1970s. We've obscured her identity. We will refer to her as Kate. She says Savile had the run of the place and would watch female patients in the bath.
If he was having a bath, he'd actually come in the bathroom while he was having a bath. And there was like two baths. There was no screens or anything, and he just walked in. And there was nothing you could do because, you know, you did have male nurses, so it just seemed perfectly, you know, you're not a person.
You'd obviously be naked in the bath,
yeah.
And Savile would just
walk in. He would just walk in.
But you're having a bath, you're naked in a bath, Jimmy Savile walks in.
Yeah.
What reason does he have to be there to do that?
None. He was just joking with the staff and looking at you.
And he would look at you whilst you're in the bath?
Yeah.
But she says Savile went beyond leering and abused her on one occasion.
I was sat in the day room. It was the first time I'd actually gone down to the bad block. And he put his arm around me. And I didn't like that. Didn't feel comfortable. But, you know, nobody seemed to be bothered about it. You know, oh, he's just being friendly, he's just being nice, you know what I mean? But I didn't like somebody being that close. And he tried to touch my breast. And I just sort of moved my hand away and I thought, maybe he's made a mistake, maybe his hand's just, you know, trying to reason. I didn't want anybody touching me there whatsoever, you know. And then he tried to put his hand between my legs. And tried to move his hand up. And I just stood up and I just said no.
Kate says she reported the incident to a member of staff. We don't know whether anyone spoke to Savile about the alleged incident. But Kate says, as a result, she was put in solitary confinement for several months.
And you just become like a vacuum in your head. You don't count anything. Because you don't see the day or the night. You're just sleeping on the floor. You just got a cardboard potty.
Kate says she was so scarred by the incident, she tried to kill herself, but staff stopped her. Her account of Savile's access is backed up by two former psychiatric nurses who worked at Broadmoor between the mid-1970s and early 2000s. They confirmed to Exposure that Savile had keys and could enter the female wards. They said he would often appear unaccompanied and unannounced. These three testimonies portray Savile as a commanding figure at Broadmoor. Access to keys, access to patients, the opportunity to abuse. But after decades of visits, Savile was promoted to a major position at Broadmoor. In 1988, the facility was in a state of chaos due to problems with staffing and finances. The government brought in a task force to take over temporarily. Savile was part of the team. According to his former PA, he believed he was top dog.
He was very friendly with the people in the Department of Health, as it was then, and there was some trouble at Broadmoor, and they'd put a task force in to sort the trouble out. And they thought, or Jimmy Savile thought, well, I could probably help here, and they put him in charge of the task force.
Broadmoor senior managers at the time insist Savile was not in charge, but we already know he had excellent contacts in government.
Welcome. Come in.
He was a guest of the former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher at her official country residence, Chequers, and she appeared on his programmes.
I don't think one ever thought that there could ever be a woman Prime Minister.
No, but we always hoped.
And within Janet's archives is further possible evidence of close ties with the government. She has a document which she thinks is a testimonial recommending Savile for a knighthood. She believes it was written by a senior civil servant at the Department of Health.
Less widely known, but no less significant for the public good, is his work for individuals. He has not only helped establish and popularise the London Marathon and others, but he also runs endlessly. For over 25 years, he has spent 1 to 2 days a week, mainly at weekends, to release in raising public awareness of the needs of previously neglected groups of disadvantaged people within society.
It's impossible to be certain because the testimonial is incomplete. Neither the Cabinet Office nor the Department of Health would confirm the contents or source. But it raises questions about the closeness of Savile's relationship with the government. Why was a man with no pedigree in mental health whatsoever given such an important role at Broadmoor? The health minister at the time of his appointment says Savile exploited his positive image.
I feel fairly sure that Jimmy Savile suggested himself for this. And we would have leapt at it because he had been a prison visitor there for over 20 years. He would have been seen as an extremely useful person, and to have a high-profile person doing this would have been so much the better.
What was that role that he was performing?
I don't think anybody ever wrote down what his role was, what his brief was, what he was allowed to do or not. He was simply seen as a friend of the establishment.
Once appointed, Savile flexed his muscles. He asked to meet Curry at his private members club, the Athenaeum. She says he told her that he had unearthed a series of problems. Staff were overpaid, there was a possible IRA cell, an officer was having an affair, even an allegation of embezzlement. Curry had no idea whether any of this was true, but after the recent exposure of Savile as a paedophile, she now believes he planned to use the information to blackmail staff.
He was choosing his victims extremely carefully. Nobody was going to believe them. Certainly nobody's going to believe the criminally insane making allegations against someone like Jimmy Savile. But they might believe a member of staff.
Right.
Or a relative, or someone else who was coming in to see a patient. And he had put himself in the position where he could say to that member of staff, I know that you're fiddling your overtime, and I know you've been doing it for years. I know that you've got your sister living in one of our houses here and that she's not been paying rent. I know what you've been up to. You will get the sack. Don't be a whistleblower. Don't even think about it. You know what happens to whistleblowers.
We don't know whether Savile ever threatened staff, but it's another hint of his power and influence. But unlike Stoke Mandeville Hospital, we've been told concerns were raised to management about Savile's access. I met a former senior NHS executive supervising Broadmoor and 2 other secure hospitals in the mid-1990s. Ray Rowden says he was shocked that Savile had so much freedom.
It seems to me beyond belief
that a non-qualified person from outside the hospital could have free rein and access to a high secure environment.
For Savile to have a set of keys to Broadmoor is quite astonishing.
I am gobsmacked. It just beggars belief that a non-member of staff could have access to a set of keys. I was the commissioning executive from the Department of Health. I didn't have a set of keys.
Rowden was so concerned, he says he challenged the then chief executive at Broadmoor, Alan Franey, about Savile's access in 1996. According to Rowden, Franey shrugged off his protest. Franey does not recall the conversation and says it was not Rowden's place to raise it anyway. But Franey and Savile had history. They were old friends from Leeds who ran marathons together. Franey provided a tribute to Savile on This Is Your Life.
Jimmy Corrigan and Alan Franey, annual support team member.
Savile suggested Franey to the Department of Health for the task force in 1988. He was even present when civil servants discussed the position with him. And that meeting took place at a familiar Savile haunt, the Athenaeum. So now Savile appears, not only to have the freedom of Broadmoor, but the power to suggest appointments. This is backed up by Janet. She says her boss wanted Franey on the task force.
Alan Franey was at Leeds Infirmary before he came down to Broadmoor and applied for the job at Broadmoor, I think at Jim's suggestion, because Jim needed somebody he knew down at Broadmoor.
Franey later became general manager and then chief executive at Broadmoor. He says he got both jobs through open competition. Throughout his 9 years as a senior manager, Savile was a regular visitor. He admits his friend had wide access, but this predated his tenure. He says there were never any problems with him, and if concerns had been raised, he would have reported them and stopped Savile's access. He insists their friendship did not compromise his authority.
I had no complaints about Savile during my whole time at the hospital from staff or patients about any inappropriate behaviour.
Whilst you were general manager, he could go wherever he wanted and you never had any concerns, and for
he could go anywhere he wanted. He couldn't go into patients' bedrooms, that sort of thing. He didn't have access to bedrooms.
I struggle to understand how you allow Savile to not only have a set of keys that would give him access to wards, OK, maybe not his bedrooms, but 2 wards, but you didn't at any stage think to speak to him and say, right, let's make this an official role, let's find out exactly what you're doing. That to me is staggering. You've got an individual who's walking around.
He had had that access for some time. I didn't see any reason to challenge what he was doing. No reason at all, quite frankly. I mean, he'd been part of the organisation for many years, long before I was there. As I say, he'd been appointed by a minister.
What role did he have? What role did you give Savile whilst you were general manager at Broadmoor?
He carried on as with his assistant entertainment officer function.
And what did that...
In fact, he never even really stopped doing that. Well, I don't think anyone was ever very clear about that, you know, I mean...
But surely you should have been clear at the very least, you're the general manager.
He would sometimes bring in celebrities to the staff social club, which was outside of the secure perimeter. He didn't really have a role as such.
Savile clearly played a role in your appointment because he put you forward, he was there during the interview meeting, and indeed he had a significant role throughout your period of time, even on the task force, moving into general manager's role. Did you feel almost indebted to him that he got you that job?
No, because I don't accept he did. I think I got that job through my own merit. And you've got to remember I had 3 jobs. I was seconded into the task force. I applied for and was appointed to general manager, and then appointed by the chairman of Broadmoor Hospital Authority to the chief executive role. No.
But with respect to your role, your previous experience, Alan, you would never have been interviewed for that role had Jimmy Savile not put you forward.
No, that's true.
And likewise, you came with no experience either in the mental health system or in the criminal justice system to that. So on both of those bases, without Jimmy Savile, you would never have got the role at Broadmoor.
I accept that he would have put my name forward. What he said, I don't know. I was assessed by the Department of Health and considered to be appropriate for the task force. I applied for the General Manager's role and subsequently the Chief Executive's role and was appointed. And as far as I'm concerned, I wasn't indebted to Savile for anything, not at all.
But did you really feel that you could stand up to Savile and
Absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind. No doubt at all.
Franey says staff were on the wards when Savile visited and he would not have allowed him to go on trips with patients. He says he was shocked by the recent news about Savile. We understand there were no allegations of abuse by Savile whilst Franey was in charge. But now, some senior figures wish they had done more to stop him.
With what has now emerged, it seems to me that the board at Broadmoor, the senior officials in the Department of Health that allowed his initial involvement badly let down the patients in Broadmoor, particularly vulnerable women, and badly let down the public. And with hindsight and regret, I wished I'd probed more myself with what I now know.
The Department of Health told us the allegations are appalling and a thorough internal review is being held into Savile's role. They are determined, they say, to learn lessons. But the Minister, at the time of Savile's appointment, says the department is culpable.
We gave him every instrument that he needed in Broadmoor to prey on some extremely damaged individuals. If Savile were alive now, I'd want to see him locked away for the rest of his life.
It is clear from our evidence Savile manoeuvred his way into a position of power at Broadmoor. He even persuaded the government he was a suitable person to help reform the facility. No one seems to have challenged him about what he was doing there. Savile appears to have exploited this reluctance by abusing patients, but alarm bells were ringing elsewhere, and the allegations were sufficient to prompt several inquiries by the police. Jimmy Savile was a paedophile who spent years in the spotlight but always hid his darkest secret. But towards the end of his life, after decades of abusing children, journalists were asking tentative questions.
The press sometimes have a field day with you. They're looking for the dirt in Jimmy Savile. And they've they've never, ever found it.
There isn't any. I'm very boring. Any tabloid journalist will tell you two things. One, I'm very boring. I don't do drugs, I don't do underage sex, I don't do any of them things that they print in papers today. But they still like coming down to talk to me.
Even if journalists were thrown off the trail, some organisations working with Savile heard enough.
Well, how lovely to see you.
How lovely, my child.
How unexpected, if I may say.
Children in Need is a landmark BBC event. Every year, tens of millions of pounds are raised for good causes, an ideal venture for fundraising impresario Savile.
Gary, tell us.
It's the Radio 1 initiative test in aid of children in need.
Yeah.
Our listeners can phone in and pledge money for their favourite team.
Jimmy, are you looking forward to this?
I'm looking forward to it like you can't believe. This is the apex of my career.
But his appearances were stopped after 1999 by a then BBC governor.
The body language of the staff when Jimmy Savile was mentioned was such that I could detect discomfort, and I came to the view that they didn't really want him involved, and I didn't want him involved either.
Jones's intervention is crucial because it demonstrates that some major figures, even in the BBC, were not fooled by Savile, but he never told anyone at the corporation about his decision.
You were aware, or you would have been aware, that Jimmy Savile was still high profile, still involved very much in children's work. Did that not concern you?
No, because I was responsible for that which I was responsible for. I was not responsible for the rest of it. Other people, producers and such like, they had that responsibility. If they wanted to do something different, fine.
But surely, having made a big decision that you made to not have him involved in children in need, it was for you to tell other people, let them make their own decision, but let them have that knowledge.
If you haven't got proof, then they would say, I'm sorry, you know, not substantiated. I would have lost it. I would have been made to look ridiculous.
But what I have a problem with is the fact that you've made that decision on a gut feeling, which is entirely right, but you didn't pass that on to anybody else. You didn't even tell them, this is a decision I've made, it's entirely up to you what you do with it, but I need to tell you. Potentially, from that one conversation, you could have opened up a complete can of worms and he could have stopped from offending against children, because the likelihood is he continued to offend after that period of time.
Well, hindsight is truly a wonderful thing. I didn't even know if I was right or not.
But you now know.
I now know. But as I said, hindsight is a wonderful thing. It gives us 20/20 vision, and you know, with that,
knowing now what you know, that this was a dangerous predatory paedophile.
I think I would have made a much bigger fuss and impact with the BBC. But as I said, that's hindsight.
The corporation says it's horrified by recent events and it has apologised for its part. 2 investigations have now started to ensure it never happens again. But the BBC is not the only institution who might have stopped Savile. After more than 40 years of criminal behaviour, he had left enough clues to trigger several police investigations. Between 1980 and 2008, there were 4 police inquiries into Savile, but he never faced justice, a source of frustration for children's campaigners.
I think the wishes of all the people that we've spoken to, that Savile was alive today, that he would be put through the courts and he would receive the appropriate punishment.
I know from experience that child abuse investigations are very complex and difficult to manage. Fundamental to their success is getting traumatised victims to give detailed accounts. This was particularly tough with Savile. He chose his victims carefully, targeting young, vulnerable people who would be afraid to speak out. And according to his confidant of 28 years, he was totally ruthless in dealing with anyone who crossed him.
If somebody was going to say something about him, whether it was in a professional capacity or a journalistic capacity, he would say, if you do that, I will make you very, very famous. And I used to remember seeing this happen. And, well, of course, by then I'd learned what he meant. He was going to expose them in the newspaper or say something detrimental about them in the newspaper.
This aggressive approach might have overwhelmed many potential accusers. But in 2007, Surrey police had perhaps the best chance to get him. They began an investigation following a report of an indecent assault by Savile at Duncroft School in the late 1970s. The school catered for intelligent girls who were deemed troubled. Exposure has already revealed that 2 ex-pupils claim to have been abused by Savile. Fiona told us she was sexually assaulted by him in his car.
I was with him on my own in the back of the car, and I knew the moment he asked me to stay in the car with him what was expected of me.
Surrey police contacted 20 former residents of Duncroft and met with Bernardos, who at the time of the allegation were managing the school. They also liaised with other police forces, none of whom reported any allegations about Savile. They developed their case sufficiently over 2 years to interview Savile under caution on the 1st of October 2009. At least 3 allegations of sexual abuse were put to him. Savile denied all the offences. The police sent the file to the Crown Prosecution Service. They ruled there was insufficient evidence to charge Savile. This decision has been criticised as a missed opportunity, but child abuse investigators say Savile's high profile made him a tough target.
One of the features of the Savile case is that he had a huge aura of celebrity around him, and I have no doubt that that will have affected the sense in which people felt brave enough or courageous enough to come forward, affected their confidence that they would be believed if they did, and I don't think there's any doubt about that. People exercise power, and that celebrity is a form of power.
The decision not to charge is now being reviewed by the Director of Public Prosecutions, although an internal review has already concluded the right decision was made. But questions have been raised about the work of Surrey Police. The force says officers decided not to interview any Duncroft staff members because Bernardo's had told them they had no record of any sexual abuse, nor had any former residents said staff witnessed or were aware of any instance. But should they have at least spoken to the school's headmistress, Margaret Jones?
Hello?
Hello, Margaret, it's Mark here. She told me she would have been very keen to help. You weren't spoken to by Surrey Police?
Right, gobsmacked. I never have been spoken to.
You've never been spoken to at all?
Yeah, I should have been told he was interviewed.
Jones, who is now 90, says she did not witness any abuse by Savile, nor did she have any suspicions. But had they spoken to her, Surrey Police might have learned crucial details about Savile's visits. Did he take any of the girls out in his car?
I'm not going to say anything.
You're not going to say anything?
I didn't see anything wrong. Anyway, let's go.
Yeah, take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Keep in touch.
For the record, I was an officer at Surrey Police for 12 years. But the scale of Savile's offending and the failure to bring him to justice has led some figures to call this a watershed moment for child abuse. Never again must victims feel they can't come forward. And there are signs this is happening. Since our first investigation, the NSPCC has been handling a dramatic rise in calls, and not only in relation to Savile.
Well, since your programme, we've doubled the number of referrals regarding sexual abuse coming to our helpline. So that's, 100% increase on that. That's quite significant. We've had a 60% increase on people who are seeking advice about concerns that they might have regarding children who might be victims of sexual abuse or have historically been abused as children.
Before I finish my investigation, I have one final letter from the Savile archives, which I want to return to sender. In 1996, children's campaigner Esther Ransom wrote to Savile, thanking him for his contribution to a book for her charity Childline. Esther has done decades of work for children, and she finds the letter galling.
Just makes me feel that he deceived me and fooled me the way he fooled everybody else over the years. And doesn't surprise me, because that's what paedophiles have to do. They always say monsters don't get near children, nice men do. And it's only by making this sort of image for himself he could get near children. But I am fascinated that this is the only thing he ever did for Childline. And what I'm wondering is, if only a child had rung us as a result of this book and told us what he was doing to them, we could have passed that to the police. We could have done so much good. In a sense, an opportunity missed.
Esther believes the Savile scandal must be a turning point for child abuse allegations, and she's calling for changes in how victims are treated in court.
The law at the moment doesn't protect children. What we need to do is, as a first step, we have to stop cross-examining children in open court. The cross-examination, if it has to happen, should happen in judges' chambers. I have witnessed a little girl being told she was lying 13 times by a defence barrister. I know they regard it as their duty to break down the credibility of the child however they can.
And that just about winds us up for this week's Pop Chocolate.
Jimmy Savile, possibly the most prolific child abuser on police record. A celebrity who escaped detection by hiding in the spotlight. Even now, we don't know the full picture of his crimes. But can we be sure history won't repeat itself? That victims will be heard and believed, and ensure that abuse on the scale perpetrated by Jimmy Savile can never happen again. Anyone affected by the issues raised in this programme can contact the NSPCC helpline on 0808 800 5000 or their local police force. You can also find further information at itv.com/exposure.
with the number of people in the UK suffering heart failure rising. Tonight we'll be taking a look at why we have such a critical shortage of donors. Waiting for a Heart is tomorrow at 7:30. Taking a look at the truth behind the great train robbery is on the way.